People didn't say it out loud in Chestnut Hills, Ohio. They didn't have to. The looks were enough. And for 11-year-old Marcus Bell, new to town and proud of his father's job at NASA, the silence spoke louder than words. This story isn't just about space, it's about who gets believed and who doesn't. The moving truck rumbled down the narrow street of Sycamore Lane, its wheels leaving a faint pattern of dust across the clean pavement. When it finally sighed to a stop and pulled away, it left behind nothing but three figures in a cul-de-sac so quiet you could hear the leaves brushing the sidewalk. The Bell family stood in front of a freshly painted two-story house that looked like every other on the block. Beige vinyl siding, a tidy patch of grass, and a mailbox that still had the tag from the hardware store hanging off it. It was late September in Chestnut Hills, Ohio, the kind of town where the American flags hung perfectly angled off porch rails and the garbage cans were never left out past pickup day. Everything was neat, controlled, intentional, but even on that still afternoon, you could feel something underneath it all, something watchful. Marcus stood with his hands deep in the pockets of his NASA hoodie, the one his dad brought home from the Artemis training event last spring. He shifted from one foot to the other, scanning the identical houses on the street, looking for something, anything, that felt familiar. But there were no other kids outside, no chalk drawings on the sidewalks, no basketball hoops tilted at odd angles in the driveways. Just a row of polished silence. He wasn't nervous. Not exactly. This wasn't his first move. Atlanta, then Houston, and now here. His dad's work had always meant change, but this time felt heavier. Maybe because the last house had a view of Johnson Space Center through his bedroom window. Maybe because in Houston, when he said his dad worked for NASA, people didn't blink. They leaned in. Now, as he looked up at the washed-out Ohio sky and the unfamiliar street, he felt a chill creep under his sweatshirt. Not from the temperature, from the quiet. "Come on, champ," his dad called, slapping the side of the SUV. "Let's see what Ohio's got for us." Marcus followed, his sneakers crunching on the smooth gravel of the driveway. Across the street, a woman in a floral blouse was watering her front lawn. She paused when she saw them, just long enough for Marcus to notice. Her sunglasses hid her eyes, but the stillness in her posture said enough. She offered a tight-lipped smile, then turned back to her hydrangeas. Inside, the house smelled like lemon-scented cleaner and dry paint. Boxes were already stacked like miniature skyscrapers across the hardwood floor. His mom moved through the space with practiced speed, calling out where things should go. His dad, still in jeans and a gray t-shirt with a fading NASA logo on the sleeve, was hunched over a router, trying to get a signal strong enough to FaceTime Grandma. Marcus climbed the stairs and found a room with a sliver of sky outside its window. It didn't face anything interesting, just another beige house. But it was upstairs, and the light hit the walls in a way he liked. He tossed his backpack on the floor and stood at the window, gazing out at the thin strip of clouds above the rooftops. He closed his eyes and imagined the moon hanging just beyond those clouds. He thought of the rocket model he packed carefully between two layers of bubble wrap, and the flight path of Artemis II that he'd memorized. He used to lie awake thinking about it. The launch, the rotation around the moon, the return. Now the silence in this house was so complete, it was hard to remember how close space used to feel. The door creaked open behind him. "You get the good view?" his dad asked, leaning in. Marcus nodded, still looking out the window. "It's fine." His dad stepped into the room and stood next to him. "It's not Houston," he said softly, "but it's a good place. And hey, the stars are still out there. Just gotta wait for night." Marcus didn't answer. He watched a bird land on the roof across the street. The woman with the watering can was gone. His dad nudged him with a grin. You'll find your rhythm, Marcus. Just takes a little time. You always do. But this time, Marcus wasn't so sure. Later that night, after the boxes had been opened and the Wi-Fi finally connected, he sat on the edge of his bed and stared at the folder tucked into the side of his backpack. The label was neat, Career Week, Marcus Bell. Inside were laminated photos, his favorite one showing him and his dad inside the zero-gravity simulator. There were printouts about the Artemis program and a hand-drawn diagram of the Orion capsule with color-coded arrows and fuel flow charts. In Houston, he couldn't wait to show people. Now, in a place where no one looked like him, where a simple smile from a neighbor felt more like surveillance than welcome, he wasn't so sure what people would see when he stood up in front of them. A kid with dreams? Or just another kid making things up? He zipped the folder closed and laid back, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow was the first day of school, another room full of strangers, another teacher, another roll call where his name would hang in the air just a little too long. But Marcus had learned something in Houston that he carried with him wherever they went. The truth doesn't need permission. It just needs a voice. And though he didn't know it yet, in just a few days, he was going to need that voice more than ever. Career Day came faster than Marcus expected. By the second week of school, flyers went out to all the students at Chestnut Hills Elementary, announcing the annual event. A time for kids to share what their parents did for work. It was supposed to be fun, simple presentations, photos, maybe a uniform or two. But for Marcus, it felt like more than that. It felt like a chance to finally show people who he really was, or at least where he came from. While the other kids tossed the flyer into their backpacks without a second thought, Marcus held his like it was something precious. That night at the dinner table, he unfolded it in front of his parents and said, "I want to talk about Dad. I want to do it right." His father raised an eyebrow, then smiled. "All right then, let's get to work, cadet." Together they printed out photos. One of Mr. Bell in a NASA flight suit, standing beside a life-size mock-up of the Orion capsule. Another showed him mid-air in the zero-gravity jet, arms outstretched, grinning like a kid himself. They included a map of NASA centers across the U.S., highlighting Johnson Space Center, where Mr. Bell trained, and Kennedy Space Center, where Artemis missions would eventually launch. They even added a propulsion schematic, not too complicated, just enough to explain how the SLS rocket would escape Earth's gravity. Marcus practiced the pronunciation of Artemis over and over until he could say it without tripping on the second syllable. He laid out his Navy NASA shirt, the one with the Artemis patch over the heart. It was a little big on him, but that made it feel even more official. The night before the presentation, he placed the folder on his desk like a mission briefing and went to sleep staring out the window, whispering stats about lunar flybys to the stars he couldn't see past the suburban haze. The next morning, he woke up before his alarm. He dressed carefully, smoothed the collar of his shirt twice, and double-checked that the corners of each printed photo weren't bent. At breakfast, his mom packed his folder gently into his space-themed backpack and kissed the top of his head. "Just be you, baby," she said. "You got this." School was already buzzing when he arrived. Posters lined the hallways with crayon-colored drawings of parents as police officers, dentists, mechanics. Mrs. Patterson, his homeroom teacher, stood by the whiteboard with her clipboard in hand. Her tone clipped as she called for the class to settle. "We'll be hearing from several of you today," she said. "Please remember to be respectful and, above all, honest. No exaggeration. No fantasy." The words settled like dust in the air. Marcus blinked. Was that directed at him, or did she say that every year? Students began taking turns. Emma talked about her mom selling real estate. Tyler's dad managed a grocery chain. Colin, the boy who hadn't spoken to Marcus since the first day, said his father coached varsity football. Then Mrs. Patterson looked up. "Marcus, you're next." He stood slowly, folder in hand, palms sweating slightly. He walked to the front of the room, opened the folder, and held up the first photo. His dad in full flight gear, beside a training module. "My name is Marcus Bell," he began, "and my dad works for NASA. He's an astronaut candidate training in the Artemis program." For a second, the room was quiet. Too quiet. Then someone in the back gave a small laugh, quickly stifled. Marcus continued, flipping to the next image. His dad inside the zero-G jet. "He was selected last year, and he trains with a team of scientists and engineers. He's learning to operate long-duration space missions and preparing for surface operations on the moon." He was mid-sentence when Mrs. Patterson interrupted. "Marcus," she said, her voice smooth but firm, "we did ask students to be realistic today." He froze. "I am. I'm sure your father has a very interesting job," she said, arms now crossed. "But there's no need to embellish. Astronauts typically live in Florida or Texas. We're in Ohio. Maybe next time you could share what he really does." Marcus felt the words slam into him. He couldn't speak. Around him, someone giggled. Another whispered, "Liar." A boy mimed a rocket taking off behind his back. He started. Mrs. Patterson raised her hand. "Thank you, Marcus. That's enough. Please take your seat." He stood there for a moment, still holding the photo, his fingers clutching the edges too tight. Then he lowered it, closed the folder, and walked back to his desk. He sat down slowly, as if afraid the chair might vanish beneath him. The rest of the presentations went on. Marcus didn't hear a word. His ears buzzed with something low and mean. When the final bell rang, he didn't move until nearly everyone else had left. That night, when his mom asked how it went, he said, "Fine." But at dinner, his silence spoke volumes. And when his father gently asked, "Did something happen?" Marcus finally looked up and said quietly, "She said I was lying." Marcus didn't cry that night. He wanted to. The tears had burned behind his eyes the whole ride home. But he held them back, clenched jaw, tight fists, staring out the window like the trees rolling past might offer answers. At the dinner table, he barely touched his food. His fork scraped circles into the macaroni and cheese like he was drawing orbit patterns he no longer believed in. His mom noticed first. "Sweetheart," she said gently, placing a hand on his back. "You okay?" He shrugged. "I'm fine." His dad looked up from his plate. "Career day go all right?" Marcus hesitated, then mumbled, "It was whatever." They exchanged a glance across the table, the kind that carried a quiet alarm. His mom tried again. "Did they like your presentation?" Marcus stared at his plate. "She said I made it up, that I was lying." Silence. His father set his fork down slowly. "Who did?" "My teacher, Mrs. Patterson." The words fell heavy between them. "She said astronauts don't live in Ohio, so I couldn't be telling the truth." His mother's lips pressed into a tight line, her eyes flaring with something sharper than shock. His father's jaw tightened. "In front of the class?" Marcus nodded. Everybody laughed. No one spoke for a moment. The room felt suddenly smaller, the lights overhead a little too bright. "You told the truth," his father said quietly, but firmly. Marcus looked up, eyes shining but refusing to fall. "Then why didn't she believe me?" His father exhaled through his nose hard. "Because some people only believe what fits their version of the world. And when it comes from someone like you, a black kid in a mostly white town, it's easier for them to doubt than ask questions." His mom reached over and held his hand. "But that doesn't make it right or okay." Marcus didn't respond. He just sat there, smaller than he'd been the day before. Over the next few days, something in him began to shut down. At school, he stopped raising his hand. Even when the topic was something he loved, like the phases of the moon or gravitational slingshot theory. He stayed quiet. He didn't trust the room anymore. The folder from career day stayed in his backpack, untouched. The edges of the photos started to curl. The printout of his dad inside the zero-G plane got a crease through the middle, right through his smile. The whispers didn't stop. "NASA boy," someone muttered in the hallway. "Probably thinks his dad's on Mars," a kid joked at lunch. They didn't say it loud. They didn't have to. The words slithered between locker rows and behind cafeteria trays, just loud enough to sting. Even Mrs. Patterson pretended like nothing had happened. She never mentioned career day again, never brought up the incident, never apologized. But Marcus felt it every time she skipped over his raised hand. Every time she called on someone else for a question, he knew he could answer better than the textbook. So he stopped trying. His desk, once organized with pencils sharpened and paper squared, became messy. His handwriting shrank. His notes turned into barely legible scribbles. Assignments that used to take time and care were now rushed just to be done. At lunch, he sat at the far end of the cafeteria by the window, where no one else wanted to sit because the sun came in too bright. He didn't mind. The light made him feel like he was somewhere else. At home, he talked less. He still did his homework, still said yes, ma'am, and no, sir. But the spark was gone. The energy in his voice, the curiosity in his eyes, all of it had dimmed. His parents noticed right away. "He's not bouncing back," his mom said one night in their bedroom. She stood with her arms folded, watching the monitor of Marcus's baby cousin sleeping through a video call. "He's shutting down." "I know," his father said, sitting on the edge of the bed, laptop open but untouched. "I'm writing the email tonight." "It should have been written already. I wanted to give it time," he sighed. "I thought maybe it would blow over." "Well, it didn't." Her voice cracked with emotion, the kind only a mother's heartbreak can produce. "You saw his face. He doesn't believe in himself right now. And if we don't fix this, he's going to carry it for years." His father rubbed his face with both hands. "I'll fix it," he said finally. "I promise." He stayed up late writing the email. Calm, respectful, but clear. He explained who he was, what happened, and that they expected a conversation, not to argue, but to address what was said to their son and what it meant. Mrs. Patterson's response came the next afternoon. Short, polite, careful. "Thank you for reaching out. I would be happy to meet during the upcoming parent-teacher conferences. I look forward to clearing up any misunderstandings." Misunderstandings. The word hit like ice water. There was no misunderstanding. Marcus hadn't lied. He had simply stood in front of a room and spoken his truth. And someone in authority had decided that, because of how he looked and where he lived, it couldn't possibly be true. The parent-teacher conference was scheduled for Thursday evening. The sky hung low with gray clouds that never quite opened up, and the air carried that particular Midwest stillness, cold, damp, and waiting. Marcus stayed home. He'd asked not to go, and after a long conversation the night before, his parents agreed. His mother had wanted him to hear the apology himself, but his father had gently pointed out that what needed to be said first had to be between adults. He was right. Derek Bell dressed with purpose that evening. Dark slacks, a crisp button-down shirt, and his NASA ID badge tucked neatly into his inner jacket pocket. Not for show, for proof. Denise Bell, always composed, chose a navy skirt suit and low heels. Her earrings were small, subtle, but her eyes, and they were anything but. She moved through the house with a silent intensity, brushing a piece of lint off Derek's collar, checking the envelope in his hand one last time. Inside was documentation. Derek's official astronaut candidacy letter, photos from Artemis training, and a sealed verification letter from the senior mission administrator at Johnson Space Center. No room for doubt. No room for spin. When they arrived at Chestnut Hills Elementary, the parking lot was half full. Lights flickered against the windows. Inside, the walls were decorated with drawings of stick figure families, crayon rainbows, and posters that said things like, "Integrity means doing what's right even when no one is watching." Denise read one and tightened her jaw. They found Mrs. Patterson in classroom 3B, seated behind a small desk meant for 8-year-olds. She stood as they entered, smiling. The same professional, tight-lipped smile she'd given Marcus on his first day. "Mr. and Mrs. Bell," she said, "thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." The chairs were comically small, but Derek sat without complaint, laying the folder in his lap with the same care he might use to carry an instrument panel. Denise followed, posture straight, purse balanced across her knees. "I understand you had some concerns after career day," Mrs. Patterson began, her voice light, her hands clasped neatly. "I'm glad we can clear up any misunderstandings." That word again, misunderstandings, like Marcus had mumbled, or she had misheard, like the damage hadn't already settled in his chest. Derek leaned forward, calm and deliberate. "Our son came home confused, ashamed. He told us you called him a liar in front of his peers when he talked about my work with NASA." Mrs. Patterson's smile didn't falter. "I reminded the class to keep their presentations realistic. Sometimes children exaggerate, especially when they're new and want to impress others." Denise's voice cut in, low and even. "Do you correct every child in front of the class? Or just the black ones who say something you don't find believable?" That smile finally cracked. "I certainly didn't mean it that way," Mrs. Patterson said quickly. "I treat all my students equally." "You treated our son like a liar," Derek said. "Not privately, publicly. You didn't ask questions. You didn't verify. You decided in that moment that what he said, that who he is, couldn't be true." Mrs. Patterson blinked, glanced down at the folder on Derek's lap, then back up again, as if only now realizing the conversation wasn't going to dissolve under pleasantries. Derek opened the folder. First, the NASA ID, laminated with the iconic blue logo. Then a full-color photo of himself in a pressurized flight suit standing next to the Orion module. A printed assignment sheet, the Artemis crew pool roster, the verification letter. She picked up the badge and studied it, as if it might disappear if she looked away. "You're stationed in California?" "Pasadena," Derek replied. "Jet Propulsion Laboratory. But I train out of Houston. NASA doesn't just exist in Florida." I wasn't aware." "No," Denise said. "You weren't. But instead of checking, you told a 10-year-old boy he was lying. You made an example of him, and the rest of the class followed your lead." "I wouldn't say I humiliated him." "You don't get to decide that," Derek replied, voice low but sharp. "You called him out. You shut him down. And now you're trying to shrink it into a misunderstanding." Mrs. Patterson sat back in her chair. Her shoulders were stiff, her fingers laced tight. "You owe him an apology," Denise said. "Not just privately, in front of the class, the same way you dismissed him." There was a pause, then a slow nod. "You're right," Mrs. Patterson said. "I should have asked questions. I should have listened. I didn't. And I'm sorry." "You'll say that to Marcus." "I will. And not as a throwaway," Denise added. "Use it as a teaching moment, about assumptions, about space, about truth." Mrs. Patterson took a breath. "Of course." Derek closed the folder. "One more thing," he said. "I'd like to come in and give a proper presentation, not just to clean up what happened, but because I know how powerful it is for kids, especially kids who look like Marcus, to see someone like me talk about space." Mrs. Patterson hesitated, then finally offered something real. "They would learn a lot. I think it would be wonderful. When they left the school, the wind had picked up again. The parking lot was darker now, lights humming against the sky. Inside the car, Denise exhaled slowly. She didn't know how to admit she was wrong. "No," Derek said, "but now she has to." The next morning, the sky over Chestnut Hills was unusually clear. The wind had quieted overnight, and the clouds that had hovered like a warning all week were gone. But inside Marcus Bell's chest, the storm hadn't passed. Not yet. He got ready for school the same way he always did. Quietly, efficiently, with a kind of practiced distance. He didn't rush, but he didn't linger either. He pulled on his navy blue NASA shirt, the same one he'd worn on career day, freshly washed and folded by his mother the night before. When he stepped into the kitchen, his dad looked up from his coffee and gave a small nod. "You sure you want to wear that one today?" Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I want to." His mom handed him his backpack, the corners of the career day folder now slightly rounded, but still neatly packed. "You don't have to say anything today," she reminded him. "Just listen. Just be present." "I know," Marcus said. He didn't smile, but he didn't look away either. At school, the morning felt strange. Students moved through the halls with the usual buzz, but there was something quieter in the air. An edge of uncertainty, like when the lights flicker before a storm, but never fully go out. Marcus walked to class with his head high, his shoulders square. He didn't avoid anyone's gaze. He didn't search for approval either. Mrs. Patterson was already at her desk when he walked in. She looked up, caught his eye, and gave a brief, respectful nod. Not her usual forced smile, not performative, just quiet acknowledgement. The rest of the class trickled in, voices low. A few glanced at Marcus, quickly looking away again. No one whispered. No one laughed. That silence for once didn't feel like exclusion. It felt like waiting. When the bell rang, Mrs. Patterson stood and walked to the front of the room. She didn't hold her clipboard. She wasn't holding anything at all. "Before we begin today," she said, "I need to speak to you about something important." Every student stopped moving. Even the ones who usually doodled in the margins of their notebooks looked up. "Last week, during career day, Marcus shared a presentation about his father's work with NASA," she continued. Her voice was calm but different. Not robotic, not dismissive. Measured, intentional. "And I made an assumption. I questioned his truth, and I did so in front of all of you. That was unfair. It was wrong, and I want to apologize." The room was silent. She turned and looked directly at Marcus. "I'm sorry, Marcus. You told the truth, and I dismissed it. I didn't ask questions. I didn't show you the respect you deserved, and I regret that." Marcus blinked. He wasn't sure what he expected. Maybe more excuses, maybe nothing at all, but not this, not clarity. Mrs. Patterson turned back to the class. "There's a lesson in this for all of us, about what it means to listen before we judge, about how we choose who we believe, and how that choice, especially when made by adults, can deeply affect someone's sense of self." She paused, then added, "Marcus's father is a candidate in NASA's Artemis program. He will be visiting our class later this week to talk about his work in space science. I hope you'll all come with open minds and respectful questions." Marcus didn't say anything, but he felt something shift inside his chest. Like a pressure he hadn't realized he was holding finally released. For the rest of the morning, he kept his head down, focused on his work, but the tightness in his shoulders had lessened. When Emma passed him the scissors during an art project, she didn't hesitate. When the class worked in pairs during science, no one recoiled or laughed. The apology hadn't erased what happened, but it had reopened the door. That evening, back at home, Marcus was sitting at the dining table sketching the new Artemis launch vehicle from memory. His father walked in, loosened his tie, and set his keys on the counter. "How'd it go?" She said it in front of the whole class, Marcus replied, still looking at his paper. She apologized. His father didn't ask for more. He just walked over, placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, and gave it a gentle squeeze. You did the hard part, he said. Marcus looked up, his voice quiet but sure. I think they listened this time. His dad smiled. Good, because you've got more to say. That night, Marcus pulled the career day folder from his backpack and laid it out on his desk again. He smoothed the pages one by one, careful and deliberate. Then he took out a fresh sheet of paper and wrote across the top in bold letters, Mission Log, Marcus Bell, Day 1. The change didn't happen overnight, but it started that morning. Marcus walked into class the day after Mrs. Patterson's apology and noticed something subtle but real. No one shifted their chairs away from his. No one rolled their eyes when he sat down. And for the first time since career day, when he raised his hand during science, Mrs. Patterson actually called on him. His answer wasn't long or flashy, just a clear explanation about why the moon appears in phases. But when he finished, she nodded and said, Exactly right. Thank you, Marcus. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't applause, but it was something. Later that week, Colin, the same kid who had scooted his desk away from Marcus on day 1, walked over during group project time and hovered awkwardly. Hey, he said, eyes on the floor. You want to partner up for the Mars rover project? Marcus paused. A month ago, this same kid had snickered when Marcus mentioned zero gravity. Now he was asking to be part of what Marcus knew best. Sure, Marcus said, not smiling, not cold, just steady. Let's do it. They started small, pulling research from NASA's student portal, sketching a basic model of the rover's arms system, comparing terrain data from different Martian sites. At first, Colin was all bravado and noise, cracking jokes, pretending not to be impressed. But as Marcus walked him through the rover's landing process, showed him how the retro thrusters worked, even how scientists controlled it with a delay from Earth, something shifted. You really know your stuff, Colin said one afternoon. Like for real? Marcus shrugged. It's just what I love. That was the difference. He didn't need to convince anyone anymore. He let the knowledge speak for itself. By the second week of the project, more classmates began to notice. Matthew, a quiet boy who mostly kept to himself, asked Marcus to look over his solar system diagram. Emma offered him a seat at her table during lunch without prompting. And Mrs. Patterson? She began asking Marcus to preview science lessons, not as a favor, but as a sign of trust. One morning she handed him a printed handout before class. We're starting planetary orbits next week, she said. Let me know if anything looks off. You've got a better eye for this than I do. Marcus blinked. You want me to check it? She smiled, not forced this time. If you're willing, he nodded. Yeah, I can do that. He still remembered the laughter. He still remembered the sting of being called a liar. That didn't disappear, but it wasn't the only thing people saw anymore. Now when students talked about space, they looked to Marcus, not because they had to, but because he'd earned it. He was no longer the kid with the folder they'd mocked. He was the kid who stayed true, the one who led. It started with a single line in the morning announcements. Students interested in astronomy or space science are invited to attend an informational meeting next Wednesday during lunch in room 12. Most kids didn't pay much attention. They were too busy whispering about video games or weekend plans. But Marcus froze. He looked up from his warm-up worksheet, heart ticking faster. Room 12. That was Mrs. Patterson's classroom. That afternoon, he waited until most students had filed out before approaching her desk. You said something about a space meeting? She looked up, already expecting him. I spoke with the principal, she said. After your presentation, a few students showed interest in learning more. I thought, Maybe we could build on that. Marcus tilted his head. You're starting a club, she smiled. Only if students show up. The next Wednesday, Marcus sat in room 12 alone for the first 5 minutes. He'd brought a small folder of extra NASA pamphlets and a few sticker sheets his dad mailed from a training event in California. He pretended to organize them, but really he was waiting. Then the door opened. Matthew stepped in, holding a juice box and a granola bar. Is this it? He asked, glancing around. I think so, Marcus said. Matthew sat without another word and started flipping through a handout about the Artemis program. 2 minutes later, Emma appeared, followed by a sixth grader Marcus had never spoken to. Finally, just as Marcus had decided no one else was coming, Colin stepped in, holding a tray from the cafeteria and trying to act like he wasn't nervous. Mrs. Patterson arrived last, carrying a plastic bin filled with books, sky charts, and a tabletop telescope. She looked around at the 5 students and nodded. Looks like we've got a crew. In the first few meetings, things were quiet and a little awkward. Mrs. Patterson guided them through basic topics, what everyone knew about planets, what they wanted to learn, what kind of experiments they might enjoy. Marcus mostly listened. He didn't want to take over, but when the others asked questions, he answered, clearly, calmly, without making anyone feel small. When they stumbled over concepts like escape velocity or light years, he explained with analogies his dad had taught him, using paper clips, marbles, or lunch trays. One day, Collins suggested using chalk to draw a scale model of the solar system on the basketball court. Like, if the sun is a beach ball, he said, Neptune would be somewhere by the back fence, right? Marcus grinned. Yeah, maybe even past it. Matthew raised his hand. Can we use the gym if it rains? Mrs. Patterson smiled. I'll see what I can do. By week 4, the group had a name, Nova Crew, in a corner of the classroom where they stored sky maps, posters, and the telescope. More kids started stopping by, curious. A 4th grader showed up with homemade constellation flashcards. Another brought a shoebox full of space shuttle drawings. Mrs. Patterson stepped back and let the club take shape naturally. She still guided, but she didn't micromanage. When Marcus asked if he could lead a short session on the Mars rovers, she handed him the whiteboard marker without hesitation. He wasn't just part of the club. He was part of its heartbeat. One afternoon, after everyone else had left, Mrs. Patterson approached Marcus at the supply shelf. I've been thinking, she said, there's a district grant for STEM enrichment. If we apply, we could get a real telescope, maybe even some building kits. Marcus blinked. We could really get that? She nodded. If you help me write the proposal. Marcus straightened his shoulders. Let's do it. The grant application went out on a Friday afternoon, submitted with quiet confidence. Marcus had helped write the section about the club's purpose. How exploring space wasn't just about rockets and stars, but about giving kids the chance to see themselves as part of something bigger. He quoted something his dad once said at the dinner table. The stars don't care where you're from. They shine the same for all of us. Mrs. Patterson read that line twice before typing it into the proposal. 2 weeks later, the approval came through. A modest but meaningful STEM grant from the district, enough to purchase a tabletop telescope, astronomy kits, and a small bookshelf for their growing collection of materials. Marcus helped unpack every box. He ran his fingers over the smooth metal of the new telescope, carefully placed each laminated star map on the shelf, and labeled the new binders by category. Planets, rovers, telescopes, NASA history. But the biggest shift wasn't in the supplies. It was in the classroom. Mrs. Patterson had changed, not all at once, but steadily. She no longer skipped over Marcus's raised hand. When she introduced a new science unit, she asked for his opinion first. One morning, she handed him a draft worksheet titled Understanding Orbits. Think you can check this over? She asked. I want to make sure I'm not oversimplifying eccentricity. Marcus scanned it, nodded. It looks good, but I'd maybe explain that orbits aren't perfect circles. More like stretched out ovals. She smiled. You're right, I'll add that. It wasn't just science class. During group projects, when classmates discussed roles, they began turning to Marcus naturally, not as a know-it-all, but as someone they trusted to get it right. Even Colin, once too proud to ask, now regularly leaned over and whispered, "Hey, double-check this for me." There were still moments. Some kids still whispered, still remembered the old laughter. But it didn't carry the same weight anymore. Because now Marcus had a presence, one rooted in knowledge, steadiness, and something else. Earned respect. Outside of class, the Nova crew kept growing. Mrs. Patterson let Marcus lead an entire session on Artemis mission planning. He used diagrams, short videos his dad had sent, and even brought in a real mission patch. One Friday morning, the school principal visited during a club meeting. She stood quietly in the back as Marcus explained the difference between low Earth orbit and lunar orbit. When the meeting ended, she approached Mrs. Patterson and spoke in a low voice. Later that day, an announcement went out. Willow Creek Elementary will be hosting its first ever stargazing night, open to families in the community, hosted by the Nova crew. Marcus's heart skipped. Flyers went home the following week. Dark blue with silver stars and bold white letters. Explore the night sky with the Nova crew. At lunch, students asked questions. Real questions. Are we going to see Saturn? Can we bring binoculars? Will your dad be there? Marcus smiled each time. We'll do our best. And yes, my dad's helping us set up. The laughter that once followed him in hallways had faded, replaced with something quieter, deeper. The story was changing, not because people had suddenly seen the light, but because Marcus never stopped shining it. The night of the stargazing event arrived cool and clear, a rare gift for an Ohio spring evening. Families spread blankets across the open field behind Willow Creek Elementary, their breath visible in the chilled air, flashlights flickering like fireflies across the grass. Marcus stood beside the new telescope, adjusting its focus with practiced hands. He wore his NASA hoodie and a lanyard with the Nova crew badge they'd designed together. Around him, kids pointed up in awe as the sky slowly filled with stars. That bright one, Marcus said, kneeling next to a second grader. That's Jupiter. You can even see a few of its moons tonight. The girl gasped, tugged her brother's sleeve. Come look. Nearby, Mrs. Patterson stood with Marcus's parents, watching it all unfold. The laughter, the questions, the discovery. She didn't try to control the moment. She just let it breathe. Later that night, as the crowd thinned and the sky deepened to a rich black, Marcus sat between his mom and dad on a blanket. His father pointed out a slow-moving dot overhead. Satellite, he said. Probably one of ours. Marcus followed it with his eyes. I want to be up there someday. His dad didn't hesitate. You will be. Even if it takes years? Especially if it takes years. Back home, Marcus slipped out of his hoodie and opened his mission log. A notebook now thick with ideas, diagrams, and dreams. On a fresh page, he wrote, Launch status, pre-flight, objective, explore, witness, prove. Then he paused, looked out the window one last time. The stars were still there, quiet, steady, distant but visible. Only now they didn't feel so far away. Because Marcus had done more than defend the truth, he'd changed the story for himself, for his classmates, and maybe, just maybe, for every kid who ever thought their dream was too big for the room they were standing in.